All right, so I'm recording right now. Oh, let me share my screen. That'd be smart.
Hello, future self.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Now I can. Yep.
Awesome. So the first step to running this web application is because it's local. If you have a Windows or if you have Mac, you're going to open up Command Prompt or Terminal. For me, I use a virtual environment, but that's not too important right now. And run it is as simple as just saying Python, then server, which is called local server backup.py. So it's a Flask web application. Flask is a full stack framework where you can tie together Python backend with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all that good stuff. So
Yep.
you'll see right.
And Flask and Flask is it one of the libraries in kind of where local server backup is also loaded?
Yes, it is a library. And speaking of that, actually, that's a good point. Let me bring this up real fast. But over here is the GitHub that
Yep.
is hosting all the code. So Tiago has
Awesome.
this. Tiago is a contributor to this, so he has access to it. This repo is normally private, so no one can actually look into it. But another thing, if you ever need instructions on how to set up, please go into the repo, and in the README, there's pretty detailed instructions with links to everything and commands that you should do to install all the libraries. And also everything I'll be going over is for the most part also written here on how to scrape data.
Great. And since I am on that GitHub repo, if I did from a command prompt the git pull local server backup, is that what I should do to kind of have the latest right now?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. So I won't fully do it right now because, but essentially, if you see my screen, I pulled up a new one. Let's say you create a new folder here. Let's say this is where you want the project to be housed. What you're going to do is in here, just so it's on tape somewhere so everyone knows,
Yeah.
um, right here, clone this repository. Cloning means you're going to take all the code and basically download it to your local. Go ahead and uh, Control C this URL, go in here, and then just type in git clone yada, and then you'll have all the updated code. I won't do that because I already have the code there, but yeah, I just wanted to show you guys that. And now you'll notice here that it says running on this URL. This is your
Mhm.
local address. So go ahead and open up an incognito window. This is just a personal preference because if you use a incognito browser, then it doesn't save as many cookies, so it refreshes really quickly. But if you go here, give it a second. This is what the web application looks like right now. So you'll notice that there are three main tabs here: the scrape tab, the keywords tab, and the summary tab. So in the scrape tab, you can literally enter in companies like Freightos, and then I don't know, another company that you want to scrape, RVM, right? Over here, I have a list of all the companies that we have in our database. So if you notice, you can put all these company names like this, or you can enter in the full Crunchbase URL. And don't worry about having duplicates. So let's say you accidentally type in Dust Identity twice or three times. Don't worry about that because at the end, all duplicates will be removed. Also, don't worry if you have the Crunchbase URL for Dust Identity and then you also write Dust Identity here. Uh,
Yep.
duplicates will be taken care of.
Yep, and in the code, basically in that case, it would default to the Crunchbase because that's a more precise lookup versus the name.
If they have, pretty much, yeah, pretty much.
Okay, cool.
So I'm gonna just copy 3 to test right now, but you just hit load data. It'll give you an ETA on how long it'll take to finish. I made the scraper run pretty slow because when you do large scrapes, I didn't want to flood Crunchbase with requests and then have them catch on much quicker that I'm a bot. And then also you will need, this is our database over here. You'll just copy the URL here and plug that URL into here. And essentially you're telling the scraper, okay, once you scrape all this data, go ahead and populate this Google Sheet. Now in the code currently, I already have, I'll just show you guys a sneak peek, but essentially right here, I already have a massive list of keywords that are specific to the supply chain visibility dive. So you'll notice there's a lot of words like IoT, SaaS, SCM, supply chain, all this. If you were to use this scraper for a future dive, let's say it's on, I don't know, something like ESGs again, you would ideally either go into the code here and replace keywords here with stuff like environment, social, governance, data, big data, artificial intelligence, stuff like that. Or you can go into here and type in like environment, social, governance, ESG, and go ahead. And I highly recommend that the keywords that you use here are very, very comprehensive, and the more the better. So I'll show you right before I start scraping what the logic is doing. So essentially, if you go to crunchbase.com, and let's say I'm searching for Freightos. This is the go-to I always use. So what I'm doing is I'm literally going to Crunchbase. I will be typing in Freightos in the search bar, and you'll notice that there's going to be a couple of companies that show up as a result. The keywords that you enter in will literally be looking for matches within the description here. So the more detailed your keywords list is for your specific dive, like including IoT, all that, specific to the companies that you're looking for, the more accurate this scraper is going to be. So because I have a lot of keywords in there that are like technology related, I think freight is one of the words. It's going to ideally identify Freightos, the very first option, as the company, and then it's going to grab this URL up here, and then it's going to scrape it. That's essentially what the scraper is doing, except all in the logic in the back end. So remember that the keywords is really, really important for the scraper. But okay, that's enough of that. I'm going to go ahead and just demo the scraper real fast. So I've loaded in 3 companies, the URL of the sheet that I want to load it into, and then I'm just going to go ahead and start scraping. So
and in the keywords tab and everything too, you can just kind of your keywords could just be a list. It doesn't have to be like comma separated or anything, right?
It does have to be comma separated.
Correct. Oh, it does have to be. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
So you'll notice here that I got caught by the CAPTCHA right off the bat, and I didn't control my mouse at all. And you'll notice that my mouse immediately went to the center of the screen, and then it played a pre-recorded CAPTCHA recording that I did, and it scales it to the size of your screen.
Okay.
And also, if you notice right there, I went to the Crunchbase URL and it automatically. So right now, I'm not controlling anything. I'm not typing anything. My mouse isn't moving. This is all automated. Yeah. But back to the CAPTCHA thing, you'll notice that it is going to scale the recording to the size of your screen, and it'll go ahead and try to beat the CAPTCHA. And once it beats it, you have like a window of like 50 searches where Crunchbase thinks that you're legit, and you can search for yada yada without getting caught again. So right now, I think in the second company in, really important as well. As soon as you start the scraper, please click on your command prompt or terminal, the thing that is running your host server, and make sure that this site that is being scraped is active. The reason for that is because when you do start using the pre-recorded recording to beat the CAPTCHA, if the button isn't there for it to click, you're not going to beat it. So yeah, that's just a small caveat. So you'll notice in your...
So just to double click on that, what am I looking for there in the command prompt?
Oh, I was going to explain actually in just a second. Yeah, but so it just finished scraping, and you'll notice it says 76 cells were updated because I searched for 3 companies with a ton of fields, and it took about 1.77 minutes. You can speed this up by tweaking the numbers, but this is the default that I've set it to. So hit OK. Now here I left a lot of logs in the command prompt. This isn't necessary, but if you ever need to debug, looking in the logs is a really good place to start. So you'll notice that it's saying, okay, I'm scraping emerge vest, right?
Okay.
So I'm printing that out to tell you what I'm starting to scrape. And then over here, oops, these are the companies that I found in the, so these are the companies I'm searching for, EmergeVest, and then these 2 URLs, right? And now I'm just printing out the progress. I just started, so I'm on progress 0. Here are the keywords that I'm using in my search for EmergeVest because it's not a URL. And then I also print out stuff like, okay, I got detected by the CAPTCHA, so now I'm trying to beat the bot detection. And then I also print out if you successfully beat it. And if you do, I have a lot of built-in sleeps to make sure that you're not scraping too quickly. It's kind of like a fail-safe.
Okay.
And if you go into it some more, it's just basically prints that are telling you what's going on in the code right now. So right now, because you provided the scraper the company name instead of the URL, it's looking in there and it's like, okay, you search for EmergeVest. Here are the companies that I found that are closely related to it and their descriptions. So Emergenics International, EmergeInvest, and then EmergeVest. So these are the 3 that I found, and then it finds the best one based on the keywords. And then it's like, okay, this was the best URL that I found, Emergenics International, and then I'm going to start scraping it, and then it'll sleep once it's done. And then progress 1 of 3, it just repeats.
Okay, so, what does the number next to sleeping signify? Is that just the number of seconds or something, or?
Yep, number of seconds. So it's sleeping for 1 second.
Okay.
And then at the end, here it's just telling you again that you finished. Also, there'll be a pop-up when it finishes scraping. And to double check that it is successful, we can go into the database. And this is the URL I provided. If we go all the way to the right, these are the 3 companies that I scraped for.
And just as a reminder, what's in a command prompt when you're typing like a file path or something like that? Do you hit tab to autofill?
Yep, tab to autofill. Okay. So we can go ahead and run it on your machine after we do this full demo and run through just to make sure it works. But essentially, I just wanted to explain that this is what the final output's going to look like. So you have all these capture fields that we specified we wanted. And it'll be under the sheet name will be the number of sheets that you have, pipe with the current date. That's just a naming convention. And then you can do whatever you want with this, like load it to Airtable, so on and so forth. So that's the actual demo of the web app. But now I'm going to actually go ahead and dive into some of the code. Now, the code is actually quite long. It's overall approximately like 1,000 lines of code. So I'm going to like high level summarize what's going on. And I did the best with documentation. You'll notice that, I document a lot of the logic in here. I'll just give you an example. For example, right here, everything that you see with this hashtag that is grayed out means that this code is not being run. It's just there for documentation's sake. So for example, right here, this piece of code over here is trying to beat the CAPTCHA logic. This piece of code here is saying, okay, you just beat the CAPTCHA logic, continue. So the most important piece of code is in the local server backup. So this is basically, the reason why it's called local server backup is because I originally tried to host this on Heroku, and I found out that it's really difficult to, if not impossible, to interface with a mouse when you need to interface with a mouse to beat the CAPTCHA. So this is just the local server, essentially.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I might. I feel like there might be something fun to kind of look at, like maybe a gaming specific server or something like that. That's a little bit more geared towards the hardware aspect. Like some sort of server that's meant for emulating an Android game or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that could be a good idea of something to go down in the future. I've had to go down. But yeah, I'll just try to go through this without taking up too much time. But essentially, in the beginning, these are all the imported libraries. Don't worry too much about it. Libraries are basically like books of Python code that you can just import, and then you have tons of codes of Python that you didn't have to write yourself.
Yep, and just on the question of the libraries that are being used, some of I see that the mouse interface is PyAuto GUI, so that's a main one. The one that you use to record the mouse doesn't work for Mac, correct? So it's kind of stored as a library or stored as a recording, kind of in here versus it being live in the code. Is that correct?
Very correct. Yeah. So I have another script here called Selenium Recorder. And This is where I'm recording my mouse movements to beat the CAPTCHA.
Okay, got it. And that Selenium recording, that would just need to be those libraries or those calls that needs to be done on like a Windows machine.
Unfortunately, yes. But ideally, you will never have to record for a very, very long time because the recording I have is very good. And also, from my experience, Crunchbase is they're not storing your mouse movements. They're computing on it using, user behavior data and ML to see if you're a bot. Once they realize you're not a bot, they just discard the data because it would be a lot of data to store. That's from my understanding.
Yeah, so it should work in until the date where there's a CAPTCHA in a completely different spot and everything like that because they've changed the website itself or something.
Yep. If that's the case, then we'll have to record something new.
Yep. Okay.
All right, so let's move ahead. These are just some global variables that will be accessible throughout the entire script. So the start time that you start running it, the URLs that you're trying to access. So these are really important variables that will need access to at all times, like the sheet ID, the service. Basically, the service here is your Google Sheets service. Its way of accessing the Google Sheets. So in the very beginning, essentially, you're running this line of code right here. If name equals main, then run here. So this is the first bit of code that is run. So what happens is, in the very beginning, I use recordings 5. It's a bad name, but essentially this is the mouse recordings to beat the CAPTCHA. I load it in, and then I parse these mouse actions with SLB. It is short for this scraper library. It's basically because this scraper has about 1,000 lines of code. I tried to clean it up as much as possible and move code that you didn't specifically need to see in a different library. I'm not going to go into the details of this function right here, but just know that you're loading essentially all the mouse actions to beat the CAPTCHA. And then the very first thing is you call setup sheets. Setup sheets. So Tiago, you already set this up, but if someone else were to set this up for the first time, then it'll basically require you to get your credentials.json, if you remember getting that, putting it in your root directory. And then it's basically saying, okay, I know who you are. You are tiagoolson@gmail.com. You have access to the sheet that you're trying to upload it to. Great. Here is the service that I'm going to return to you. And with this service, you can upload to your sheets. That's essentially what it's doing. Don't worry too much about this logic. It's pretty fail-safe as long as if you have credentials.json.
Yeah, that section is like that's probably like almost a copy and paste.
It is literally a copy paste from Google. Yep, this is literally a copy paste. If you ever need to reorder your columns from the output of the scraper, this is where you will do it. So if you want company name to be first, then you put that first. If you want it to be at the bottom, put it at the bottom. So this is what columns here is doing. I'll just go ahead and write that in. reorder compounds to your preference. Awesome. So what's going to happen now? Basically, when you load in, so if we go back to the UI, when you hit load data, you're going to the front end over here. So the front end is in HTML. Okay, so this might be a bit hard to read initially, but I assure you it's not actually that difficult. You're essentially going to the scrape tab over here, and you're clicking the button to submit your company URLs that you want to scrape. So you're saying, okay, the action is I want to go to /parse, right? So that means that you're going to this part over here, /parse. You're getting routed to this URL. So you're going to be calling this functionality. And this functionality, all it's doing is let me get the data that you just supplied me. I'm going to parse all that data. I'm going to calculate an ETA for you. And then I'm going to load the resulting page. That's all it's doing. But the important part is it's storing and it's reading all the URLs that you just passed it. And then
could you maybe just put a quick comment, around that line 337 or whatever, just explain that little blurb real quick, just saying, guess what would we say for this? Store the
URLs that are passed in.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And then you're just going to call this function load page, and don't worry too much about this. All it's doing is you're just going to load the page. And if you remember, you load the page such that stuff is supplied, just so that you know what you're actually scraping. Then you also call load sheet ID. So when you type in a sheet ID or URL and you click load sheet over here, then you'll be going to here. It's doing the same thing. It's just grabbing the sheet URL, grab the sheet URL that is passed in, and I'm storing that in the sheet ID. So now I know what Google Sheets you want to populate. So all of this will be...
And the request.form, that's just, do you have like a form UI library or something that you loaded?
Yeah, it's called request.form because in my HTML, I have a form tag here because basically I'm passing the data to the backend through a form tag. So that's why it's called request.form. Yeah.
Got it. And did Flask kind of give you that, or the framework for it?
Yeah.
Or okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So all in all, I guess what I'm trying to say is don't worry too much about the load sheet ID and the parse, because that stuff is most likely not going to break. The part that is likely to break and the part that I need to go into detail the most is probably the actual scraping logic. What's going to happen is when you click this button, scrape, you're going to go into this function progress. And essentially, what's going to happen is you're going to loop through all the companies that you're trying to scrape. And the very first step is if you notice that the company that is provided is not a URL, but a company name, then you're going to try to get the URL from the company name. So whenever you see SLB dot something, you understand that it's a function that's in the other scraper library.
Okay. Yeah. So S, and it's lowercase. So SLB dot something is a reference to you said the scraper library.py.
Yep. And the reason behind that is because at the very top, when I'm doing all the imports of my libraries, I essentially just wrote my own library and I said import scraper library as SLB. So it's just a shorthand.
Okay, got it.
Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna dive into a bit more of the meaty library, meaty code that is kind of important. So basically, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna loop through. When you click that button, I'm gonna go into here. You'll notice because I have the /progress route. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna loop through all the companies. If you did not provide me a www dot like basically if you did not provide me a URL, I know you provided me with a company name. If you gave me a company name, I need to get the actual URL. So I'm going to call this function get URLs from company name, which basically I wrote, and the logic is in Scraper library. I'm not going to go into that just yet because it'll get messy if I start jumping everywhere. I'm going to get the URL, and then I'm going to scrape it, and I pass in the URL. So I scrape this company, and then I just add it to a list that is going to house all of the data that I just scraped. So that's essentially what this line of code is doing. So
master map is that's what master map is?
Yeah, it's just a list that contains all of the data that you scraped. And at the very end, because it's a list, I just organize it into a pandas data frame, which you might remember is the library that I use to organize all my data into a nice table. Once I have it in a nice table, I'm like, okay, so this is important because something might fail down the road, and it would really suck if you spent 5 hours or something scraping like 1,000 companies and it failed at the very last step. So what I do is I save a local copy of the data, and it will be essentially located, if you go here, sorry, I'm just going to find it real fast. So this is the root directory.
It stays before the pandas transformation, just in case it goes wrong?
No, I am saving a local copy of it right before I upload it to Google Sheets.
Okay. Yep. So after pandas, but before Google Sheets. That makes more sense.
Correct. So this is the root directory of the project, Engage Scraper. Inside scraped data, these are all the local copies of the data. So in case something horribly wrong happens down the road, you still have a local copy of the data, and you can just upload it manually if you have to. Ideally, nothing goes horribly wrong, and you will call this method upload to Sheets. You pass in the df is a data frame object. It's basically the table form of your data that is super nice and easy to read.
Okay, so df is that's not a defined variable. It's called a data frame.
It is a defined variable.
Oh, it is. Okay.
So this line right here, df is equal to a pandas data frame. So is what I'm saying. Yeah. And just it's a bit out of the scope of what I'm trying to say here, but a data frame is just an object that holds data really nicely in a table.
Yep.
Okay, so you're going to notice that this code looks really, really simple, right? It's like pretty short and sweet. But the issue is it's really short and simple because I'm hiding all the logic inside this scrape function, and also in the upload to Sheets function and all that. So and also this get URLs from company name. So I'm going to first dive into this scrape function because it's the most important one. The scrape is the main logic, and I'm going to show you what I'm essentially doing. I go to Crunchbase and I go to Freightos. Again, that's my go-to example. So you'll notice here that when you go to the URL, you have a ton of data that is like number of acquisitions, 1, total funding amount, 92.7, industries, headquarters, location, description of the company, the image of the company, the number of employees, the last funding type. These are all really important information. If you ever need to scrape, so Tiago, let's say you wanted to scrape IPO status. Okay, this is not something we're scraping right now. I'll show you how to do that really fast. So just go ahead and right-click the thing you're trying to scrape, right? Inspect it. So it's going to bring you up to this, right? And if it does not bring you up to this, then just do it again. Just inspect it again. Sometimes it's a little buggy. But once this pops up, you're going to notice that this is basically the massive HTML page that you're seeing. And it's really, really long. But if you inspect it, it'll show you exactly what you're looking for. So this is the value of private. So ideally, if for another company that you search for, it's not private, it's actually IPO'd and it's public, this value will be public. So all you have to do is you just right click it, and you can hit copy, and you can hit copy XPath. So XPath is basically every single thing on this HTML page has a corresponding XPath that shows you exactly where this piece of data is. So the upside of it is that everything has an XPath, but the downside of it is that XPaths are super specific. And because of that, if something in the layout changes, you're screwed. Basically, the XPath won't exist or it'll be pointing to something else. So it's not very flexible, but it's very, it'll work for like whatever you're trying to scrape. It'll always work. And let me give you an example of what the XPath looks like. This is what it looks like. It's this massive, ugly looking thing that'll tell you exactly where the data that you're trying to scrape is located. So you can do that for the company website. You can do it for the company Facebook link. You can do it for anything. They all have an XPath. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into the scrape. Oh, Tiago, I think you're muted if you're saying anything.
Oh, and I was just saying I'm pulling up Crunchbase really, really quickly. So I'm pulling up company Calibra, and I'm just making sure really quickly that I got that, because I feel like this will be something I want to definitely maybe do in the future or something. So if I wanted to, you said like that IPO status, whatever, I go and highlight private, and then right click and press inspect.
Yep.
Okay. Yep, I've got it.
Nice. Okay.
And then the next thing is basically I've highlighted that, and it goes from span class, all of that, to span, and it's already highlighted and everything there in the code. That's it, right?
So then you right click it and you go to copy.
I right click copy and then XPath.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also full XPath. I don't do that, correct?
You don't need it. The XPath will work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, cool. So that is how you can, if you ever needed to scrape something else down the line, this is how you would do it. You would go ahead, locate the information you want to scrape, find the XPath. Ideally, so you'll notice in my code, I actually tried to make it a lot more robust. So did you notice how basically when you're trying to scrape for private, you went super specific, such to the point where you're looking at only the single line? Right now, the coding logic is set up so that I don't go for super specific details, because this can easily change from this being from IPO status to, I don't know, like something else like legal name, right? So it's not very reliable. So what I do to make it slightly more robust is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to scrape for the company name, Freightos. So that's where it's located. It's located in this span. So this is the flow of how I do it, right? So you just move your mouse up and you try to find the larger object that holds it. So do you notice how when I went up and I went to this div class flex layout column?
Yes.
And if you click it, do you notice how all that entire blue area is highlighted now? Freightos makes global trade frictionless with yada, 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 right? So you have a ton more information. So basically, if you use this XPath, you now have access to the company name, all that, so on and so forth, right? So it's just basically you're not tunneling down to the very specific object. You're going more high up, right?
Yep, and then you just have more parsing work on your end when you pull it all.
Right, but
it's more robust.
Exactly. And so you'll notice that Crunchbase, because they have pretty structured data, it's housed really nicely if you actually dig into it. But basically, this is everything that is in blue right here is actually one card. And then also if you go, this is like another, if you go to the industries, all of this is another card object. So let me see.
So they're called cards?
Yeah.
Card objects?
So it's a fields card class. That's what class equals yada yada. That's what they have it labeled as. So if you were to scrape for, basically what I'm doing, to scrape industries, founded date, founders, last funding status, number of employees, all that, this is essentially what I'm using right here. Fields, card class, yada yada, copy XPath, and then when you go into it, you can look at all the text that you just scraped, and you can say, okay, if the text says industries, then go ahead and scrape all this. If the text says founded date, go ahead and scrape that. So it's as simple as that. So basically, my advice for you, if you're trying to scrape for things in the future, is basically go higher up, not tunnel down to the very specific thing.
Okay. Yeah, and if I look at kind of the code is written and everything, that's kind of what you've done. So exactly. I can kind of mirror that sort of. So if and the very last thing, because I blanked there for a second, is you grab the whole card and it's got let's say all of that data in there. Mm-hmm. Then you have I guess how do you parse down? Do you just have like if then logic that basically just says if founders blah 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 blah, grab the string right after it?
Literally what you just said. So look at it right here. So here I'm scraping for the title blocks, aka funding, acquisitions, acquired by. So basically what I'm scraping for is right here. Mm-hmm. These big blocks, number of acquisitions, total funding amount. What I'm saying is, okay, this is the XPath, the really big XPath that I gave you. Give me all the text that is written within this XPath element. Okay, once I get all the text, I just break it by the new line character. That's what the /n is, new line character.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I literally loop through it, and I'm like, if acquisitions is a word in there, aka number of acquisitions, then I know that num acquisitions is literally equal to this value. That's literally what I'm doing. So exactly what you said. Yep.
Cool. Yeah. I'm writing down the /n thing just because that would be one thing that would like maybe trip me up a little bit just because I'd be looking through it and I just wouldn't know that definition. It's breaking it by a line.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yep.
Awesome. So I'm just going to start real quick from the actual scraping method because this is where all the main logic is housed. So when you start, I just give you a little print saying, okay, I'm beginning to scrape. So if you are using Windows, okay, so this is just a Chrome driver path. And then here, so I need to explain a little bit about Selenium. Selenium is the library I'm using to basically, Selenium is known as a web driver. A web driver is something that can basically imitate your browser. So Selenium was used a lot for QA testing. A lot of automated QA tests would be written in code, and they would just be like, go to this website and try to break it by clicking XYZ, but all of it is automated. So basically, I'm using Selenium not for QA testing, but for scraping. Same idea.
Yeah.
And the reason why I have to do that.
I guess I had forgotten that we were using Selenium, not the PyAuto GUI.
We're using both.
Both, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So because you're using that to control the mouse and the different things, but then Selenium is actually what you're using to. I guess where's the division on what Selenium does versus the other, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I got you. So basically, the pitfall of Selenium, so sure, it can open up this browser for me and you can see all the information. But let's say for Selenium, if you try to so let's say you try to click here to search, right? So if you notice, if I move my mouse here and I click it, then this pops up. Essentially what Selenium is doing is you're not interfacing with your mouse. Selenium doesn't have access to your mouse. It's saying, okay, Selenium is like, okay, you want me to click here. I know where it is because you gave me the XPath or whatever else, the ID of this object. And your cursor will be over here, but you will click it. And that's what Selenium is doing. It's not controlling your mouse at all. Basically, it just sends a packet of information saying, I just clicked that. So CAPTCHAs you will not be able to beat CAPTCHAs with that, because CAPTCHAs,
Yeah.
you'll notice after you click it and hold that button for a while, it'll pause for a long time. That is most likely where it is computing on all your mouse actions to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, you cannot just simply use PyAutoGUI and say, okay, my mouse is over here, move to the CAPTCHA, because no human can move in a perfectly straight line at the exact same rate to get to the CAPTCHA. So that's why I literally had to record and get some, like if I try to move my mouse from here to here, it was not a straight line. No matter how hard I try, it's literally impossible. So you have to add noise. Your acceleration is different. There's a ton of factors. So Selenium and PyAutoGUI fail there, and hence why you need, well, PyAutoGUI solves Selenium's problem of not being able to interface with the mouse, but then you need recordings too. So it's like a huge family of libraries that have to interact with each other to beat it.
Yeah, like technically you could do, it would probably be a janky scraper, but I guess it could work for a little bit maybe. Would be a PyGUI going to, based off of an anchor point to like Freidos, click down, drag over, and then like, copy and paste or something.
Yeah.
Or I guess you would never have to paste, but you would highlight it and copy it, and then the code would pull it from the clipboard or something. But that's obviously not and then you could do everything with your like keyboard from there or something. Just trying to like, probably a bad way to do it though.
Yeah, that would work though. But yeah.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. So just moving forward, so that is kind of an idea of what Selenium is doing. So it's a WebDriver. So you provided a ton of these Chrome options. I'm telling you, I want you to go incognito. I always want you to start maximize. This is really important because your recordings are dependent on it.
Yeah, I would imagine that's what because you start at center of mass or the screen. I mean, and it resizes. So that's what essentially makes it so it goes to the right spot for CAPTCHA, for example, on my computer versus yours?
Precisely, yep. Okay. So it's really important you start maximize and you start at the center of the screen. Don't worry about these two so much. These were when I was trying to experiment with getting to Heroku. Also, don't worry too much about this. This was a functionality I tried to implement where you would cycle through user agents and proxy IP addresses to scrape faster, but I could honestly delete this and it will have no effect on the code.
Yeah, and let's see, if you go back to that real quick, if in the future, I would like to understand it real quick. If you could leave it and it doesn't affect it, that'd be great. But you're creating a user agent, and then
you're supplying with a user agent and a proxy server IP address. So you'll notice in here in this scrape method, I'm like, you must pass me these two parameters, the URL and the name of the company. Also, there's these two other optional parameters. The reason how you can tell they're optional is because I have an equal sign and I already set it equal to a value. So I set it equal to a default of none. But theoretically, you could say, I want to scrape crunchbase.com/Freidos. The name of the company is Freidos. I give you a user agent and my IP address is yada yada. And if you did that, then my scrape would be like, okay, you supplied me with a user agent and an IP address, so now I'm going to use those values you gave to me.
Yeah.
So the functionality is there, but I could never get access to working alternative IP addresses. So you did manage to find a list of IP addresses, but I also need the port number.
Got it. And where would the port, in that case, where would the port number go?
You would just provide me the IP address for the port. So the IP address
at the end.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So and Selenium is essentially just it's spoofing that basically.
Exactly.
Because it's providing that to the browser.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. And just so I know, purple in your text editor here is basically it just means what does purple signify? Is that like a let's see.
I think it's just for clarity and readability, but it's like I guess they show all none objects and also booleans, and zeros, and numbers. So basically numbers, booleans, none types are purple, but it's kind of just for clarity. So you'll notice all function and methods are blue, variable names are white.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just writing that down. Just and then you said variables are white. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna go ahead with the rest of the logic, but essentially right here, this is for cleanliness in the data. So I'm basically defaulting the parameters for funding to be NA. I'm basically defaulting all of these parameters to the default of NA or blank. So you'll notice that in the scraped data, we have columns for engage interest, company interest, TSV interest. That shouldn't be NA, that should be blank. So it's just blank over here. The company name is defaulted to the value you provided it. So this mapping variable right here is just a Python dictionary. It's just a way to store the values in a key value pair. Don't worry too much about it. It's just storing the data for me. So right now, there is built-in functionality so that if you fail to scrape it once, don't worry, it'll scrape it again. It'll try to scrape it again. So this catches maybe like 5 to 10% of the cases and it'll fix them. The only reason why it would ever most likely fail and you would have to rescrape it is because you were scraping too quickly. So I tried to actually make it slower so that it would fail less often. So don't worry too much about that as well. But basically right here, this while loop is saying do all the scraping again if you failed. Okay, so this is where the meat of the logic starts. But you'll notice that all my logic is in these try except statements. So up there it said try. Try is basically saying try all this code, right? Try to execute it. If anything fails, go into this except statement, right? And then in my except statement, I'm like, okay, try to do this again. But if you fail, go into here. So that's all try except statements are saying. So the very first thing that happens is try this. So my very first thing is because I was developing this code on Windows and Tiago, you have a Mac. So there were a lot of complications with compatibility. So right here, I'm detecting if you're using the code on a Windows machine versus a Mac machine. If you're using on a Windows machine, then you are going to be using the driver that you specified in this path right over here. So don't worry about it too much. If you just pull the repo, this will be there for you. If you're using a Mac, Tiago, you have it set up already, but you supplied it to your bin. And I will add instructions on how to do that from scratch to the README on the GitHub in the near future. So don't worry too much about that either. So as soon as you get this, basically you're creating your driver object for Selenium. And now you're saying driver.get this URL. So this one line of code right here is going to open up a new browser and it's going to get that Crunchbase URL. So that's what this is doing. It's really important. As soon as you get it, I sleep. This is to ensure that all the information on the page populates before you start scraping, because a lot of the information is populated with JavaScript, and JavaScript is loaded when you run it, so it's not instantaneous. So basically, I just sleep like literally 1 second and the page should populate. There's better ways of doing it, but this is it works for the most part. Okay, in here, this is where all the scraping logic is. So basically, remember what I said, driver.find element by XPath. You supply the XPath that you're trying to scrape, get all the text values, and that is stored in here. And then again, I'm just splitting it by the new line character. And then exactly what you said, Tiago, I'm just doing a simple loop through all the values. Is there acquisitions? If so, then I know that I'm about to scrape num acquisitions. Acquired by, stuff like that. So over here, for the funds, because we have a specific request to get the funds in a certain format, basically I just clean up the funds with a function in the library. And remember, SLB is short for scraper library over here.
Yep. Cool. And clean underscore funds is where? Is that like a separate?
Yep, so it's in scraper library, and if you control F, clean underscore funds, that is this method over here. Basically, you just provide it with a variable called fund, and that is going to be whatever you just scraped. And this logic over here is literally just formatting it so that we have everything in the
Yep.
this format right here.
Awesome. Okay.
So cool. That is how you get the first bit of scrape data. Over here, I'm literally just scraping for the name of the company, the description of the company, and the city, state / country that it's located in. So it's basically the same logic over and over, you'll notice, right? Look at it right here. Driver.find element by XPath, give it the XPath, give me all the text. And then that's literally all I'm doing, right? It's the same logic over and over. The next piece of information I try to scrape, driver.find element by XPath, give it the XPath, collect all the textual data, loop through all the fields. Am I looking at industries? Am I looking at number of employees, founders, founded date? So this, basically, if you were to add, and if you wanted to scrape, if you want to scrape something new, start here, driver.find element by XPath, yada yada, right? This is where you would do it.
Okay.
Right,
could you actually just leave that in there and comment it out? Maybe.
Sure. I'm going to add it lower down because
that way it's not in the middle of everything.
Yeah, that way it's not in the middle. Yeah. But yeah, I will go ahead and do that. So over here, I'm scraping for the company URL. I'm scraping for and then here. So this is actually never mind. Here I am using custom business logic to determine whether or not the company is an incumbent or a startup. Basically, the current year minus 12. Is it older or younger than 12 years old? That's how you determine whether or not it is what it is. Here, I'm scraping for the image, actually, which is quite neat. The images are all hosted somewhere back on Crunchbase. And so I just get the URL of the image. Last but not least, I fill out the level of interest for Engage, TechSquare Ventures, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and comment right here. Additional scraping logic below this line. So if you ever want to scrape for more things, go ahead and add it right here, so on and so forth.
Cool.
And then at the very end, I'm trying to be a very conscientious and quote unquote ethical scraper, because I am scraping, so I am hitting their website and sending a lot of requests. So I'm trying to be nice and I'm trying to slow it down so I sleep after all my scraping, so I'm not scraping too quickly.
Yep.
Okay, so basically, right, let's say that for some reason, for some strange reason, okay, so this is actually really good. Let me go in here real fast and let me find one of the scraped data. So you might be wondering, how will this scraper break? Let me find you an example of when this scraper will break. So, okay, so this is this is actually rather old. So sorry, let me go to here, SD. So this is the newest scrape, and this is essentially what's going to look like, right? The master table. The way you can tell a scrape failed, if you go in, you'll notice that there's going to be a lot of NAs. So look at this row right here, right? Clutter, the company name Clutter. There's a ton of not applicables. That means that the scrape failed, but I gave you the Crunchbase URL so you can investigate why it failed. So I'm going to click into it. Okay, so this one failed because look, there's literally no information on this page. There's no funding amount. There's like nothing, right? So basically, essentially what happened was I tried to look for an information, but it physically was not there, so it failed. So that's one reason the scraper can fail. Basically, this company has literally like no data on it, and it failed. Let me find another one. So this one, Crowd AI. So I can click into the URL. Okay, same thing. So I found another one that failed. Samsara is one that it failed on. You'll notice, right? Look at this website layout compared to this. It's different, right? So this is typically what happens with when some websites are doing new testings on their site. It's called A/B testing, where they basically test a new layout with a small number of people.
They'll test it and to see if people like it better or convert better or whatever they're testing.
Exactly. So because of that, theoretically, if you really, really badly wanted Samsara and like maybe the small 2 to 5% of companies that have this layout because they're testing it, you could just go into inspect and get the new XPaths. But yes, exactly. Yeah. But yes, this is another reason why it will fail. Basically, the layout is different. But you'll notice that they're very few and far in between. Most of these are filled in, or basically the large majority of fails are because there literally isn't information on that company.
Yeah. Okay.
So cool. That's where something here might fail. And if it fails, remember we're doing everything in these try except statements. So you're going to go here. And so the first reason it might fail is because you just got CAPTCHA'd, right? So you just got CAPTCHA'd. So you're trying to look for a piece of information that doesn't exist because you're served a different page. So when you fail, you're like, okay, my first guess is I just got bot detected. So I'm going to try to beat it now. So now I'm going to look for, basically when you get bot detected, there's going to be in big words, I forget what it says. It says something like, please verify you are a human. So that's, it says, please verify you are a human. And if the text on that page equals that, then I know I'm trying to beat bot detection. And then I just call this method beat CAPTCHA. And again, it's in SLB, so that means it's in the scraper library.
Yep.
And after that, if you beat it, great. If you fail here, that means that you failed for another reason. And if you failed for another reason, I just try to fail it gracefully. And that basically means the program doesn't shut down. It just says, okay, I failed here. I'm not 100% sure why, but I print out for you, I failed. And it's most likely because there's not enough information. And then I just continue. So that's what failing gracefully means.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm going to screen grab that. Failing gracefully, line 310. Cool.
Now, at the very, very end, I just return mapping. And if you remember, mapping was my Python dictionary that just holds all the information. Okay, here's another thing. If you wanted to scrape new information, right? Like, let's say you wanted, what was our example? IPO status. If you wanted IPO status, you would have to add here IPO status equals NA. So basically give it the default value over here. So I'm going to actually just leave this here if you ever wanted it as an example. And then also over here, just go ahead and
in the comment too, if you could just use did we say for new scrape or just something like that in case I go in and do a find function or something. We could if you put in line 176 or whatever, just like equal for like after that, you could just say for like a new scrape variable or something or new scrape.
You want me to add that in the README, you said, or here in the code?
You can just put it in the code. Cool. Yep. This is a good reminder. You gotta always define it.
Same thing here. So basically you're defining the default value and then you're setting it equal to the default value here. And then the last place is right here. You need to set it here as well. So 3 places.
Got it.
So this last one is basically reordering, so it's not super important, but it's kind of important to get it in the right format. So this last one over here is for reformatting the columns. The other one is for setting the default value and then storing it inside this key value dictionary. So I left in comments if you want to scrape, add a new field here in the code. Cool. So that is actually right there. We actually just finished the entire scraping logic. That's the
Awesome.
So yeah, that was it. Of course, there is more in the scraper library. Okay, so I will go over just a little bit in here. Basically, if you ever needed to change, for example, how you define whether or not a company is important or interesting for Engage. So right now we have custom business logic, and we say if the company is over 6 years old, we don't care about it. Or if it has over 30 million in funding, we don't care about it. So right here, that's basically what this logic over here is saying. If the year it's founded is greater than 6 years old and the funding is over this amount, return a 1. So theoretically, you could add extra logic in here down the road if you know a company is super interesting and you want to fund it because it has super low funding. If it has like 5 million or less, you just add that logic in here and then you return 5, right? So basically, these are custom business functions to define how you're defining whether or not a company is interesting.
Got it.
I'm not going to go as into detail, like line by line, what I did before, but this function, get URLs from company name, it should basically always work, so I'm not too worried about it. But again, remember the keywords here. Please change this to whatever dive you're using this for, or you can just go into the UI and manually enter it in. But if you do that, remember you'll have to do that every single time, as opposed to just editing it here once. And again, I wrote it in the comments here, but I highly recommend you make this super detailed and as many keywords as possible to make it work really well.
Yep. And also, just a little side note on all like the variables and all this sort of stuff. Best practice just to keep it all lowercase, just so you don't.
Oh, so yeah, I think you brought that up because of the capital right here.
Actually, it wasn't even because of that, but I was just I noticed in all the other areas that it was all lowercase, so you don't like forget to capitalize or something.
That could be one reason, but there's a big debate in the computing industry about like how to name your variables and all that. The main thing you just want to make sure is you name it so that people, if they read it for the first time, right, like Chrome driver path, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So just name whatever variable you're doing as detailed as you can make it without making it a hassle to actually write out.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's basically the line of thinking there. So basically, this method is if you supply it with a company instead of a company URL. I'm not going to go into the logic, but it's literally the same thing, right? I'm just saying if you're using Mac or Windows, get the XPath, go to the search bar, click it, and then type in the company name, and then get the top 3 companies that show up, right? So it's the same logic, so I'm not going to go over it.
Okay.
Clean funds, not important to go over. You can like read that over on your own time, but it's basically clean the funds out. Sleep brand time. Beat CAPTCHA, I'll just go over it high level. Basically, I just move my mouse to the middle of the screen, and then I'm playing over the pre-recorded mouse recordings. That's all I'm doing. And then at the very end, I mouse down for 7 seconds, and then I mouse up to beat it. So it's as simple as that.
Yeah, and then just one quick question on the clean funds. What is that?
So if you notice, the
amount of funding.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, so that's where all the logic is stored in Scraper Library and Local Server Backup. These are the 2 most important files.
Okay.
Down the road, if you ever wanted to add anything to the front end, you would go to index.html.
Yep.
Don't worry about that too much if you don't plan on changing it, or styles.css. That's that. And then this last file is Selenium recorder.py. Again, we talked about it earlier, but this will only work on Windows, and ideally you will never have to use it if the CAPTCHA ever changes or something like that. But I will add it to the GitHub just in case you ever do need it.
Sure.
Yep. But yeah, that's that in a nutshell. Do you have any other questions, Tiago?
Let's see. No, I don't think so. Let's see. I guess the only do you know where it says to create a new tab in Google Sheets versus
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I actually forgot about that. So I completely skipped over this part where I uploaded to Sheets, actually. I completely forgot this method. So upload to Sheets, you'll notice you pass in one parameter, the data frame object that houses all your tabular data. So
okay.
the first thing I do is, okay, if you did not give me a sheet ID, then basically your scrape is going to fail. And that's why I save a local copy just in case, right? So please supply a sheet ID. If you do, then what I'm doing is that service object that I created at the very, very beginning, where it basically validated that I know who you are Tiago@gmail.com, so you have access to this Google Sheet. Then I return you this service object. Then I just get that spreadsheet with this ID. And here's the logic for creating the new sheet tab. So I gave it, you can create a color for it. So I just made it slightly more green so you know that that's where the new sheet is. Oh, also the sheet name. So basically my naming convention is SD, short for scraped data, number, and then if you have 10 tabs, and this is the 11th tab, so I'll just name it SD number 11, and then I'll also provide it with the date. Here is a small caveat that I'm just going to mention in the recording so that if you ever find this bug, but basically, if you have the same name, if the name of this sheet exists already, then you will fail to upload. So that's why I try to make the name of the sheet as specific as possible. So it updates every single day. So the odds of that happening is very slim. And that's also why I save a local copy of the data. So your scrape will ideally never fail completely.
Yeah, because you got literally variables and stuff in there.
Yeah. So that's where I'm creating the new sheet tab. Okay, so here, right? This is where I drop the duplicates. This is important. So if you enter in Freightos, and then you also enter in crunchbase.com/Freightos, I will scrape that twice, essentially. And then here, I will drop the duplicates by company name, so I only have one copy of it. It's just for organization. And then here, I upload the values to the spreadsheet. This stuff should all be pretty fail-safe. And then here, I just give you a little button that at the very end that gives you details saying you finished uploading. Success.
Great. That alert pops up where?
So if you remember,
terminal. Oh yeah. Oh no, that's right. That's the auto GUI.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Yep, I understood. Cool. Okay, great. Awesome. No, I think those are all my questions. So basically, just as a reminder for me to go ahead and get this running locally and everything, I just download the latest repo from GitHub.
So actually, I'm going to stop recording now. And then if you have like 10 minutes, I would actually really like to get it up and running on your computer before we end today, if you have time for that.
That would be great if we do it quick.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording now.